Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Big Four. The Big Four is an Indonesian action comedy that tells the story of a group of 4 assassins who all work in the same group together. They were trained as kids by their adoptive father Petrus to hone their skills in killing others, and several years later he retires, only to end up being killed at the hands of one of his pupils. Sometime after the Big Four disband, a police detective named Dina investigates the death of her father, who happens to be Petrus, which leads her to crossing paths with individual members of the Big Four. This in turn leads to her ending up in the crosshairs of her father's killers, so she's forced to team up with the Big Four so that she can take down her enemies once and for all. I wasn't impressed with this movie at first, but it slowly started getting better as it moved along, resulting in a thoroughly entertaining finale that blew me away. Despite some issues with pacing and tonal shifts, it ended up being a solid action flick to have some fun with. I had a hard time deciding what could be considered the main character, because it tends to shift between the Big Four and Dina, but since the movie is named after the four, it makes sense to start with them. All of the members were entertaining to see, and each one had their own individual personalities, which helped shake up the variety of their interactions. You've got Topan, who's considered the stoic leader of the group, Django, a foul-mouthed sniper, Pelor, a baby-faced rookie, and Alpha, a woman with a short temper. All 4 of them have unique interactions with each other, and all of them have great chemistry, so as far as an action ensemble goes, their performances are on point. They team up well and get the chance to show off their individual talents in the action scenes, but it's also nice to see the movie explore the history behind them and how they all connect to Mr. Petrus. It's rare to see an action movie have this kind of character development in place, so it's much appreciated to see it here, even if it isn't overly complex. But out of all the main characters, I definitely found Dina to be the most interesting. She has the most personal investment out of everyone else when it comes to learning the secret life her father led as the leader of a group of assassins, and it's intriguing to see her try to come to terms with this. She starts off being a nuisance to the Big Four and complicating the group's tasks, which I actually enjoyed. She doesn't just trust the group right away despite their inherent connection through Petrus, and takes time to develop a proper bond with each of them, which feels more satisfying as the history behind her and them is gradually revealed. Even the villain Saranto was surprisingly enjoyable, not just with his backstory, but with how much personality he has. He feels like a classic action villain with how flamboyantly he dresses and how over the top he is in his interactions with others, yet he's somehow still able to maintain an intimidating presence. As far as characters go, I don't have any major complaints. The storyline, however, is where it gets a bit more dicey, and it's not necessarily that the story itself is bad, it's fine for what it's trying to do. It more so has to do with the fact that the movie has a hard time deciding whether it wants to be a spoofy comedy flick or a dark and gritty revenge story. One moment there will be something dark and serious happening on screen, like a character death or some dramatic dialogue, and in the next it'll do something silly, sometimes within the same scene. The movie has a big problem when it comes to juggling its tone, so the jarring shift between comedy and drama tended to take me out of it. Even when the movie can get a handle on what tone it's trying to convey, it always feels more exaggerated than necessary. Characters heavily rely on swearing and slapstick in order to generate laughs, while more dramatic scenes always seem to be paired up with some emotional piano music in the background, which feels more cheesy in approach. Other times, the movie has problems with making any sort of sense. There were 2 scenes that genuinely confused me as to whether the movie was trying to be funny or not, and in the end were just plain weird. The frog skin tea scene in particular might go down as one of the strangest scenes I've seen in a movie this year. Although this silly stuff doesn't appear as much over time, they made the beginning hard to sit through. Thankfully, the action scenes help the audience forget some of the more off-putting moments from the story and are by far its biggest saving grace. The quality of these scenes is excellent, as it features a ton of bloody gunfights, brutal physical stunts, and beautifully choreographed melee combat. There's even a decent car chase thrown in for good measure. The violence in some of these action scenes are just as ridiculous and overblown as the drama and comedy can be, but for some reason I don't mind it as much. Even though most of it is computer generated and it's not realistic at all, there's just something cathartic about seeing the Big Four's enemies getting blown up and torn to pieces, and in so many creative ways too. Although the CGI doesn't look the best, especially when there's an explosion, it isn't used too much, and it's balanced out more with practical effects for blood and fire. And as I mentioned earlier, each member of the Big Four, including Dina, gets the chance to show off their own skills, which is a lot of fun to see. The final brawl between the Big Four and Saranto's forces is without a doubt the biggest highlight the movie has to offer. It cuts the BS associated with the story and becomes pure action, leading up to the final fight between Topan and Saranto, which is by far the best best hand-to-hand combat scene I've seen in a movie this year. Despite how good the action is, I did appreciate that it took its time building up the story in between the more actiony bits, because it allows the audience to become more attached to the main characters and want to see them succeed. The 3-year time jump that happens in the first act was sudden and wasn't paced well, but other than that, the story and action go well together. The cinematography is also something I have to give major credit for. Not only does the movie have a great aesthetic style when it comes to portraying the dark and gritty nature of the Big Four's line of work, but it also does a fantastic job at showing the action and following it as it evolves. In many Western action movies, melee fights for some reason tend to be filmed up close, I guess to show how brutal the fights can be, but most of the time they're disorienting and the camera makes it hard to tell what's even happening. Here, however, the action is filmed in full clarity. The audience can always see and tell what's happening, which makes the action that much more enjoyable. I found the movie to be much more fitting as a badass action flick / revenge story instead of trying to be the best of both worlds in terms of drama and comedy, although I will admit there were some moments of comedy that made me laugh a bit. The first act is a bit of a slog to get through with its bad jokes and excessive drama, but it starts to pick up pace in the second, and by the final act, man is it awesome. Overall, The Big Four is an entertaining action comedy that falls short with the latter part of its genre, but more than makes up for it with the former part of it. If you like action flicks, you're looking to watch one that actually features some degree of character development and can tolerate some strange narrative choices, you should check this one out. It's definitely a more offbeat action movie and has some faults because of that, but its strengths with character development and its entertaining action scenes are able to overcome these faults, resulting in an entertaining experience that lives up to its namesake. What did you think about this movie? Were you blown away by the action like I was, or did you find it too silly for your liking? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of The Big Four. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Mexican comedy drama, Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. Bye bye!